Okay, so we are going to start chapter 5, fields, or rather more specifically field extension. Extensions of fields we are going to study here. So these are some of the initial words from the author. In our discussion of rings, we have already singled out a special class which we called fields. We already know what fields are. We have seen their definition when we studied rings. A field, let us recall, is a commutative ring with a non-zero unit element in which every non-zero element has a multiplicative inverse. In other words, a field is a ring in which the non-zero elements form an abelian group under multiplication. That's what fields are. Fields play a central role in algebra for two reasons. For one thing, results about them find important applications in number theory, in the theory of numbers. For another, their theory encompasses the theory of equations which treats questions about roots of polynomials. Now, in these two types of applications, we are going to touch only lightly on the field of algebraic numbers. The number theoretic aspect will be less. It will be explored much less than the other aspect. That is, we will be emphasizing more on those aspects of field theory that tell us something about equations and their roots. Although we will not treat this material, that is the equation part, in its fullest or most general form, we shall go far enough to introduce some of the beautiful ideas by the French mathematician Évariste Galois. This is pronounced Galois, okay, not Galois. So let us start the first section then in this chapter, extension fields. So this is section 5.1. Extension fields. In this section, we will be concerned with the relation of one field to another. Given a field F, a field K is said to be an extension of F if K contains F as a subfield. That is, if F turns out to be a subfield of K, then K is called an extension of F. This terminology is pretty easy to understand and remember also. You have a field F, you find a larger field K in which F is sitting as a subfield inside of K, then K is called an extension of F. Throughout this chapter, so this is the convention we are going to follow. F will denote a given field and K an extension of F. So if we see the symbols, the letters K and F, we have to understand that F is a field and K is an extension of F in this chapter. As was pointed out, earlier, in the chapter on vector spaces, if K is an extension of F, then K is a vector space over F. You recall our video on vector spaces. We have started vector spaces. You recall the first example. There we have shown that if we have two fields, one of which is a subfield of the other, then the larger can be considered as a vector space over the smaller field. The addition of vectors is the addition in the larger field, and multiplication of a vector by a scalar, it's just simply it ultimately turns out to be multiplication that we have in the larger field K. So as a vector space, over F, we can talk about linear dependence, basis, dimension, etc. In K relative to F, or in K over F. And this prompts the next definition, our first definition in this. Actually, this is not the first because we have already defined what extension means, but this is a very important one. Important enough that it is given as a definition like this. The degree of K over F, where K is an extension of F and F is a field, is defined to be the dimension of K as a vector space over F. K is a vector space over F, so it will have some dimension over F. That dimension is called the degree of K over F. We shall denote the degree k over f by this symbol. So it is nothing but this quantity, dimension of k over f as a vector space, but this is a new notation that we are going to use to denote the degree of k over f. So naturally the case in which we will be interested is when this degree is finite. We will be interested in the case where the degree of k over f is finite, that is, when k is a finite dimensional vector space over f. And in fact, when this happens, when the degree of k over f is finite, we have a language for expressing that. We express this situation by saying that k is a finite extension of f. Don't confuse yourself into thinking that this means k is a finite set. No. The degree of k over f is finite, or the dimension of k over f as a vector space is finite. That's what we mean when we say k is a finite extension of f. The dimension is finite, not cardinality. Now the most fundamental result involving these finite extensions is this. The theorem is not very difficult, its proof is also quite straightforward, but it's important nonetheless. If L is a finite extension of k and k is a finite extension of f, then L is a finite extension of f. Moreover, the corresponding degrees are related by this equation. The degree of L over f is equal to the degree of L over k times the degree of k over f. So the dimension of L as a vector space over f is the product of these two dimensions. To prove this, we will directly produce a basis of L over F which will have this many elements, because then that proves not only the fact that L is a finite dimensional vector space over F, or the degree of L over F is finite, but it in fact proves this sharper result that the dimension actually is equal to this. So let us start with finiteness of L and K as extensions. Since L, or instead of again repeating the things that are already given, we start like this. Let M be the degree of L over K and N be the degree of K over F. These are given to be finite. Then M and N are positive integers. Note that although in the theory of vector spaces we do have the possibility for a vector space to be zero dimensional, namely when it has only one element, but that is not the case here. None of these numbers can be equal to 0 although they are dimensions. Why? Because the smallest possible degree of an extension is 1, and that happens when this L becomes equal to K. For example, if we look at this one, K is a subfield of L. So the least possible case is that K is equal to L. In this case, the dimension is 1. Otherwise, the dimension is greater than 1. The dimension will never be equal to 0 for these extensions. So that's why we write then M and N are positive integers. Now, because these dimensions are not 0, they are positive integers. So each space, that is L as a vector space over K, will have a non-empty basis, and also K as a vector space over F will have a non-empty basis, because we know that the zero space which has only one element has the empty set as its basis. That is not the case here. So that means now that we are going to consider bases of these vector spaces, they will be non-empty finite sets. Let V1, V2, etc. up to Vm be a basis of L over K. Since M is the dimension, so there will be M vectors which will form a basis. There may be multiple bases, but at least there is one. And let W1, W2, etc. to Wn be a basis of K over F. Consider the set, or consider the subset. Let us call this also something. What should we call it? Say A. Of these products VIWJ, where I varies from 1 to m and j varies from 1 to n, and this is a subset of L. Because everything is happening inside L, these VI's are of course being a basis of L, are elements or vectors in L, and the WJ's are vectors in K, but K itself is contained in L, so the WJ's are also vectors in L, and this is the ordinary multiplication we have in the field L. So these are after all elements of L. So as such, A is a subset of L. Now our aim is to show that this A is actually a basis of L as a vector space over F. So we have to show two things to prove that. One is that we have to show that every element of L is a linear combination of these vectors with coefficients coming from F. That will show that A spans L, and then we have to also show that A is linearly independent. So let us show the span first. Let T be any element in L. Since these vectors form a basis of L over K. We have, so that means this element T in L will be a linear combination of these vectors where the coefficients are coming from K, because we have written over K. So we have T1 equal to, say, alpha 1 V1 plus alpha 2 V2 etc. alpha m Vn for some scalars coming from K. But this is a basis of K over F. So each of these alpha i's is a linear combination of the Wj's with coefficients coming from F, because over F. Since this is a basis of K over F, we have alpha 1 equal to F11. We should use double suffix because you will understand why. Let's just first write the linear combinations. One N Wn. Alpha 2 is equal to F21 etc. F2N Wn. Like this. Alpha m is equal to Fm1 Fmnwn, where or for some Fij belonging to F, where I varies from 1 to m and j varies from 1 to n. We can now use these expressions for the alpha i's there in this linear combination. Then t equal to, I think it will be better if we write another term, alpha 2 v2 etc. plus alpha m vm. So this is f11 w1 up to f1n wn v1 plus f21 w1 plus f2n wn v2. Like this we go, and eventually we have fm1 w1 plus fmn wn vm. Now we can use the right distributive law that we have in the field L, as well as the fact that multiplication is associative in the field, to write this sum like this. F11 v1 w1. We are also in fact additionally using the fact that multiplication is commutative, because we are in a field everything is possible except division by 0. f1m v1 w1, it is this term. Oh, it's wn, sorry. Plus f21 v2 w1 plus f2n v2 wn, like this. In the middle somewhere we have a general term vi wj, and the last one, if we write this one, it is fmn vmwn. Thus T is a linear combination of the vectors in A with coefficients from F. So A spans L over F. Next we have to prove that A is linearly independent over F. Next, let alpha ij belong to F for I varying between 1 and m and j varying between 1 and n such that this sum is this linear combination alpha ij vi wj is 0, where I lies between 1 and m and j lies between 1 and n. This is how we have to write the sum if we are considering all the elements of A. So it's the linear combination of all the elements of A, and that linear combination has been assumed to be 0. Then summation beta I vi is equal to 0, where beta I itself is this sum alpha ij wj, j is varying from 1 to n for I lying between 1 and m. What we have done here is just the opposite of this. Here we wrote the expressions and then multiplied things out. Here we have brought things together. That is, we have taken vi common out from the terms which contain that particular vi for a fixed I. For example, if I is 1, we have taken vi common out from all the terms where we have I1, and those terms are precisely the ones where I is 1 and j is varying. So once we take that vi common out, the rest of the things that we have inside, they give us beta I, which is this. Okay, so this sum, which actually can be thought of as a double sum, is a linear combination like this, where each beta I itself is a sum. So essentially here we are starting from here and then we are getting to this stage, okay, with alpha ij in place of fij. Okay, now what do we have? The beta i's are elements in K, because the alpha ij's are elements in F and the wj's are elements in K. In fact, they are basis elements. So each beta I is an element in K. So this is a linear combination of the vi's with coefficients from K. Now since we know that the vi's form a basis of L over K, so this linear combination becoming 0 implies that each coefficient has to be equal to 0. So we are now going to write these things. Since beta I belongs to K for each I lying between 1 and m, and this is a linearly independent set over K we must have beta I equal to 0 for all I lying between 1 and n. So that means now each beta I is equal to 0. That is summation alpha ij wj is equal to 0 where j is varying from 1 to n for each I varying from 1 to n. Again, since the wj's form a basis of k over f and the alpha ij's are in f, so these equations tell us that all the alpha ij's must be equal to 0 because the wj's are linearly independent over f. Since for and each j and w1 w2 etc. this is a linearly independent set over f. We have for all I between 1 and m and all j between 1 and n. This shows that A is linearly independent. Now a consequence of this linear independence, we must mention linearly independent over f. A consequence of this linear independence is that the number of elements in A, that is the order of A, is nm. In the set A we have the VIWJs. Now nothing really tells us before we got to this part where we proved that A is linearly independent, nothing else tells us that the elements in A are actually distinct. If they are not distinct, if we have repetition, then in that respect, should I have defined A as a set? That is another question. Actually, see, in a set we don't usually repeat elements. The problem I am having now is that since we defined this as a set VIWJ where I and j vary in so and so ways, if there is any repetition, then that repetition will not be considered in this set. So I think it will be better to not consider it as a set and simply as a list of elements where we may have repetitions. That possibility is there, but after proving that the list of vectors is linearly independent, or the vectors in the list are linearly independent over F, the possibility of repetition is gone. That is a consequence. Why? Because you see, if you have a list that looks like this, a list of 3 vectors that looks like this, then this is a linearly dependent set. How? You can consider this linear combination 1u plus 0v plus minus 1u. This gives you 0. Not all the coefficients are 0. So that possibility is now gone. After proving that the list of vectors is linearly independent, there can be no repetition. Now in the actual list there are clearly n times m elements, because we are considering a product of n elements and m elements in all possible forms. So there are nm elements, at least nm symbols in the list. Now as vectors or as field elements, linear independence has now allowed us to conclude that they are distinct. So we do have exactly nm elements in the list. So all I am saying now is that instead of defining A as a set, you just say A is a list of these vectors. Okay, you make that small change. And now we can say that order of A, number of elements in A, is nm. We have thus shown that A is a basis of L over F, because A spans L over F, and also A is linearly independent over F. So it is a basis of L over F. Since it is finite, the degree of L over F is finite. In fact, which one comes first? What is M and what is N? I think M is the first one, because in M we have considered, yes, M is the first one. M is the dimension of L over K. So let us write Mn. And N is the degree of K over F. So we have proved this nice result about finite extensions and their degrees. Okay, let us now consider some general things. Suppose that L, K and F are fields such that L is an extension of F and L is an extension of K and K is an extension of F. Assume that the degree of L over F is finite. Okay, degree of L over F is finite. Since K is a subspace, or let's write like this, since as a vector space over F, K is a subspace of L, because L is a vector space over F and so is K, but since K is contained in L, so K is a subspace of L as a vector space over F, and hence the degree of K over F is finite, because we know that if we have a finite dimensional vector space, then any subspace is also finite dimensional, and in fact there is that sharper result which says that the dimension of the subspace is less than or equal to the dimension of the original space. Since elements of L that are linearly independent over K are also linearly independent over F. Finiteness of the degree of L over F implies that the degree of L over K is also finite. What we are saying here in this last line, since elements of L that are linearly independent over K are also linearly independent over F. Why? Because you see, suppose you have some elements in L, say L1, L2, etc. Suppose Ln, some elements in L that are linearly independent over K. So that means if we consider a linear combination of these Li's, with coefficients from K, where the alpha i's are coming from K, and if we set this linear combination equal to 0, then each alpha I is 0. That's what these elements being linearly independent over K means. Now we claim that this automatically implies that these elements are also linearly independent over F. What happens if that is not the case? If that is not the case, then we will be able to find elements in F, not all of which are 0, such that this linear combination is 0. The Li's not being linearly independent over F means existence of such beta i's, not all of which are 0, but such that the corresponding linear combination is 0. But then, since F is contained in K, we would then have found elements in K that are not all 0, such that this linear combination is 0. So this contradicts the hypothesis that the Li's are linearly independent over K, because now they have become linearly dependent over K. So that's why we are saying that whenever we have elements in L that are linearly independent over K, then they are also linearly independent over F. Now from this, how does it follow that finiteness of this degree implies finiteness of this degree? Suppose this degree is not finite. Suppose this is not finite. What does that mean? It means that we can find a linearly independent set that is as large as we wish in L over K. But such a linearly independent set, because of these arguments, would automatically also be linearly independent over F. So that means we will be able to find arbitrarily large linearly independent sets in L over F. And that clearly contradicts the fact that the dimension of L over F is finite, because since the dimension is finite, we can find at most that many linearly independent linearly independent elements in L over F that is equal to the dimension. In fact, if we find a set of elements in L where the number of elements is equal to the dimension of L over F, then such a set would be a basis of L over F. It cannot go beyond that. However, infiniteness of this implies that that would be possible. So this is a contradiction. So that's why this cannot be infinite. Summarizing in short, any linearly independent set in L, it looks better this way. This is K, this is L, this is K, this is F. Any linearly independent set in L over K is automatically linearly independent over F. Now, it is given that the linearly independent sets in L over F have a maximum size, maximum possible size, that is the dimension of L over F. So naturally, the linearly independent sets in L over K will also have a maximum size, and as such the dimension of L over K will be finite. So that's how we are concluding this. Hence, so now note what we have. We have an extension K of F, which is a finite extension because this is finite, and an extension L of K that is also a finite extension. So by the previous theorem, the this is finite. In fact, that conclusion does not give us anything new, because we were given that this is finite. But the other thing, namely this equation, tells us something. Hence, by the above theorem, the degree of L over F is equal to the degree of L over K times the degree of K over F. This implies that the degree of L over K divides the degree of L over F, because these are after all positive integers, so this equation gives us divisibility. So we have thus proved the following corollary to that theorem. The corollary is this: if L is a finite extension of F and K is a subfield of L containing F, then the degree of L over K divides the degree of L over F. Oh, this is not what the author is concluding from this equation. Rather, the point of interest is this. Okay, fine. The degree, because just like excuse me, this one divides this one also divides this, that also follows from that equation. That's what we are interested in here. So if we have a finite extension L of a field F, and in between L and F we have another field, that is K, which is a subfield of L and it contains F as a subfield of its own, then the degree of K over F divides the degree of L over F. Thus, for instance, now this divisibility will have implications, just like we have a divisibility relation in Lagrange's theorem in group theory. Here also we have a similar thing. If the degree of L over F is a prime number, then there can be no field properly between L and F. A little later in Section 5.4. In section 4 of this chapter, when we discuss certain geometric constructions, this corollary will be of great significance. Okay, let us now go to a new definition. The element A belonging to K is an extension of F, that thing is there. The element A in K is said to be algebraic over F if there exist elements alpha naught, alpha 1, etc., alpha n in F, not all 0, such that this expression alpha naught a to the power n plus alpha 1 a to the power n minus 1, like this, alpha n minus 1 a plus alpha n is equal to 0. That is, if we are able to find for a given element in the extension K, if we are able to find scalars in the underlying field, not all of which are 0, such that this polynomial expression in A with those scalars as coefficients becomes 0, then we say that this element A is algebraic over F. That is, A is expressible algebraically. No, I should not say that. A satisfies a polynomial equation. This with things will come, we will see, the terminology is coming. If we just simply informally say, you can say it like this: an element A in K is said to be algebraic over F if A satisfies a polynomial expression with coefficients from the field F such that not all of which are 0. Specifically, we are trying to say this: if Qx equal to beta naught x to the power m plus beta 1 x to the power m minus 1, etc., plus beta m be an element in the polynomial ring Fx and B be an element in K, then By the symbol QB, we mean the element this in K. We denote this element by QB, which you can see has been obtained from this polynomial by replacing x by b. This is after all going to be an element in K. Note that these two things are entirely different things. This is a polynomial in fx, whereas this is an element in K. Okay, they are two different things, although they look the same, they have the same structure. In the expression commonly used, we have been using it for a very long time, since our childhood, because we have been working with polynomials since when we were first introduced to algebra. And from that point itself, or a little while later, we started evaluating polynomials. We started putting values of x and evaluating a polynomial, find the value of the polynomial. In that sense, we are saying these things and setting this terminology. Q of b is called the value of the polynomial q of x obtained by substituting b for x. We say that B satisfies Q of x if QB is equal to 0. If QB is the 0 element in the field K, then we say that B satisfies the polynomial Q of B. And this language we have been we have always used for say real polynomials with real number coefficients. In these terms, A in K is algebraic over F if and only if A satisfies a non-zero polynomial in fx. Non-zeroness of the polynomial takes care of the fact that not all the coefficients in this expression are 0. Okay, now we are going to look at something else. Let K be an extension of f and let A be an element of K. Let M denote the collection of all subfields of K that contain both F and A. That is, K will have subfields which contain F as a subset and A as an element. Such subfields always exist in K because K itself is such a subfield, and M is the collection of all such subfields of K which contain both F and A inside of it. Note that M is non-empty because K itself is in M. So because M is non-empty, we can without any problem define the intersection of the elements in M because it's after all a collection of sets, and that intersection we are going to denote with the symbol FA. This is the intersection of all the elements in M. So each K prime is first of all a subfield of K. So their intersection is also a subfield of K. In fact, the verification of this I leave to you. It's extremely straightforward. Since each K prime, this is a subfield of K, if A is also a subfield of K. Verify. Moreover, since A belongs to K prime and F is contained in K prime for all K prime belonging to M, we have A belonging to FA and F is contained in FA. That means every element in M contains F as a subset and contains the element A as an element. So their intersection would also contain the element A as an element and F as a subset. Thus, so what have we got now? FA is itself a subfield of K that contains both F and A. Thus, FA is contained in M, which shows that FA is the smallest subfield of K that contains both F and A, and it has a name. We call Fa the subfield of K obtained by adjoining A to the field F. It's like attaching A to the field F, and also to make Fa a subfield, attaching as less elements as possible, so that it's like this. You have F, this is your K, and you have the element A here. We don't know whether A itself belongs to F or not. In general, it may not be. Now, you are considering a subfield that is containing F and A, and at the same time it is as small as possible. So it's like adjoining A to F, and along with that adjoining as many elements as we want to just make the larger structure a field. Okay, so that is the subfield of K obtained by adjoining A to F, and it is the smallest. Why is it smallest? Because it is simply by definition the intersection of all subfields of K containing both F and A. So, and this itself is such a subfield, so it will be contained in every such subfield. So that's why it's the smallest. Now one can in fact find the general structure of the elements in this field obtained by adjoining A to F, that is the general structure of elements of Fa. And for that general structure we are going to define a set, and we will show that that subset of K in fact is equal to Fa. But this we will do in the next video. Next video means the next algebra video from this book will be again on vector spaces. If possible, along with that itself, I will also upload a field theory video. Otherwise, we will see that in the Monday after that. That is the next Monday, the Monday after that. And then we will proceed with the things. How these an element in the extension being algebraic over the underlying field F, what does it have to do with the degree of an extension, and what is the relationship between the degree of Fa and algebraicity of A over F? Those things are related. Okay, so we will see these things. So let's end the video here. If you want to say something, you can comment in the comment section below, of course, or you can mail me. So that's all in field theory for today. We have just started. In the subsequent videos we will explore more and more of this fascinating. This is a very interesting part, and the most interesting part will be that Galois theory, where we will investigate roots of polynomials based on symmetry groups of those roots. Okay, so those things we will see. So I'm signing off for tonight. This is me, Lucifer, from A Mathematical Room. Have a nice night.